Paul's speech title is called the Trinity. What's in a name? Do they define who we are? And so with that, please welcome to the lectern, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Growth Masters. I am my father's son. This is to mean that before I was born, they knew I was going to be a boy, and he decided I was going to be named Paul Gerard Rodriguez II. He's named, of course, Paul Gerard Rodriguez. There is no senior or junior. There's a little bit of a faux pas as far as convention goes, and the hospital let him know this, that he was naming me incorrectly. And he told the hospital, forget you, but in slightly more colorful language than that. Needless to say, my father won this argument, you can tell by my official documents in the name here, I am named Paul Gerard Rodriguez II. This name would follow me through work and school. Anytime I needed a name that said Paul, or that needed a document that was a ID or birth certificate or social security number, it went with Paul. So this was something that followed me everywhere I went. The name Paul took on a personality that was more reserved, very businesslike, almost stoic, because it was a very official name to me. Now, growing up in a house with two people of the same name, it was very inconvenient to have two people called Paul. And from the very start, I was never called Paul at home. Having been born in Hawaii, there was an odd convention of where young boys were given a name where there was an E sounding at the end, and then they added boy. My cousins were and still are Eddie Boy, Danny Boy, and Louie Boy, even though they're in their 50s and 40s. Paulie was never an option because the mafia was never a big influence in the islands. So we went with my middle name, Gerard, which shortened to Jerry, and I was known as Jerry Boy as a young kid. And this stuck with me. An odd side note to that, Gerard is spelled with a G, but they spelled Jerry with a J. Now, whether this was an odd coincidence or something that my parents picked up on right away, my sisters would later be known as Johnette, Joey, and Jessie. We picked up on it as kids, and our pets would be named Jinx, Jack, Jake, Jim Dog, etc. It was rather fun trying to hear people say our names while we were growing up. Jerry was more of a relaxed personality since he was at home and not at school. He had a good sense of humor, a little quirky, and he was someone who you would more normally see on the beach than you would in a classroom environment. There was one thing, though, that both personalities share, and that was the fact that they were both shy, very reserved. They didn't have an easy time talking to other people. This duality suited me and kept me going all the way through high school until I was 16 years old. I decided that I was going to join the military. This decision came about because my grades were not that good. I had the motivation to go to college, but I did not have the money or the grades. So I decided at that point, before my senior year, to join the Army. My parents had to co-sign the paperwork because I was underage, and they were more than happy to. My family has a long tradition of military service. After basic training and language school that followed, around a year and a half into my military service, I found myself in Texas, where I was going for my advanced individualized training. Here we learned a lot of things about our jobs. I was a 98 Charlie 1 Lima KP, which is to say I was a signal analyst with a language trailer. One of the things we learned was cryptography, which is something that me and my roommate and best friend excelled at. So we would often find ourselves a little bit ahead of the class and very bored. So we took to taking our names and scrambling up the letters a little bit and coming up with new and interesting names to use. He became Nightum Yar Tharline, and I became Lupa Durgar Riggersound.
Yeah.
Now, Nightum Yar Tharline lasted for about a week, and so did the Durgar Riggersard part of my name. But Lupa, for some reason, stuck. Everyone picked up on Lupa, and that's who I became. For the next 2 years in the military, I was known as Lupa, even to my higher-ups, which was unusual. The fact that I came into this name, it was almost sort of a transformation, because I was becoming a man. I was young, 20, 21, and I was in the military. I was making new friends and becoming more outgoing. So Lupa became the personality that was a little more on edge, a little crazier, a little bit... If there was ever a story I were to tell where something really crazy happened, it was Lupa. I got out of the Army. I continued using all three names. It became like a trinity of who I was. It was a amalgamation, and it suited me well. For the next 20 years or so, I went with Paul, Jerry, and Lupa. Depending on who you talk to, that was who I was. However, I do believe there's going to be a fourth name soon. In the very near future, I see a personality coming about that's a little bit, hopefully mostly Jerry, a little bit Paul, just a tiny bit Lupa. And that name's going to be Dad. And my son, if I have one, will be known as Paul Gerard Rodriguez III. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, Lupa, Gerard, Jerry. What would you like us to call you?
Paul's fine.
Excellent. And that's what we will do. I forgot to mark your time, but I'm pretty sure